Can an ozone machine like hotels use for smoke be used for seasonal house cleaning? Yeah, it can be used, but a problem with ozone, in my experience, in my opinion, is that if it's a preventative, you can do that. You just have to leave the house, because ozone as a gas is toxic and dangerous to you if you're in there, and it's dangerous to your pets. It's not something, obviously, you want to turn it on at high levels and stay in the home. And that's one of the problems with ozone, is its toxicity level, and you've got to ramp it up high in order to be effective. But one of the best preventatives for mold, I like that question, is to use essential oil. There have been some really good, actually, research studies done in the industry that find that essential oils can be very, very effective, not so much at getting rid of mold. So first of all, don't try to treat your mold with essential oils. You treat the mold, you find the source of the mold, and you mitigate why it's there. So if it's water damage, you take care of that, you fix that, you make sure no more mold will grow. Then you can use strong doses of different types of essential oils, and you can aerate that, or you can diffuse that through the home. And that mold, essential oils have actually been shown objectively to degrade mycotoxins. They've also been shown to inhibit and be preventative for future mold growth. And so what are good ones? Frankincense and clove and cinnamon and orange and other citrus oils all work really, really well. There's a particular brand that actually has had some studies done on it. It's a particular company, but they produce a product called Thieves Oil, and that product has been shown to be pretty effective. So I would tend to use something like that because it's non-toxic and there is an impact and a good effect, versus, say, an ozone machine that it is toxic. Right now, ozone can be effective, but in my experience, it doesn't do the best job. Neither do those big mold bombs that they try to run through your house or through your AC units. Those things, I've seen so many times where people spent thousands of dollars doing that, and it was just not effective. UV sterilizers in the HVAC? No. If you have a UV sterilizer in your ducts, understand that the air is just going through. It's just circulating through. So what happens is that you got a UV light installed in your ductwork, and that air is just blowing right by it. There's no concentrated UV exposure that's occurring because that air just keeps circulating, so that UV doesn't do much. Now, where UV light is most effective is on the filter itself. So if you've got one of those thick filters like a MERV filter, or you've got like one of my favorites is IQ Air. They're great. They make a great whole house air filter. It's shaped like a W, and putting UV light on the filter, because the filter captures mold, and the UV light prevents the mold from propagating and growing. So you want to capture the mold, shine the filter or the light on the area that's being captured, and not just have a UV light randomly placed in your air duct where there's not going to be much of an impact or an effect. Because you can spend hundreds of dollars on those UV lights, and they don't do much unless they're aimed at the filter. What can you do for a fungal sinus problem? If it's fungus, because you find out why it's growing first and foremost. So I mean, in my experience, when people have a fungal sinus problem, it's generally because they're immunosuppressed. But there's some natural things. One of the things you can do to help keep your sinuses healthy is use a neti pot. With just a neti pot, with just the classic salt water in the neti pot. You want to use distilled water and use the salt, otherwise it'll really dry out your sinuses. But that can be a very effective and inexpensive way to keep your sinuses clear. If you have a problem with persistent mold growing in your sinuses despite using a neti pot, then you've got an environmental mold issue that you need to get investigated. Look, guys, mold is one of those that it's like the thing that if you want to put your head in the sand about something, you want to put your head in the sand about mold, because when you find it in your house, I can promise you this, it's usually a big money cost. It's a huge, huge expense if you find it in a big way, especially if it's a construction defect, because sometimes you're not just talking about remediating a small little area where there was some water damage. Sometimes it's you've got to remediate the whole house, and you're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've got to get rid of old furnishing. You've got to throw out your mattresses and your pillows. They won't go in the wash, and you can't wash it specifically. You got to get rid of it. Many of the things, you have to get rid of because they become contaminated, right? And if you're very, very sick and you're trying to make your way out of being chronically ill, you have to escape the contaminated environment, and that's where the struggle is for a lot of people when they're in mold. It's it's a death by 1,000 cuts, because when you're trying to get out of a moldy home, you've lost your favorite blanket, you've lost your favorite pictures, you've lost your mattress, you've lost your furniture. It can be very, very, like I said, it can be very debilitating and stressful to do, but you'll die in a moldy house. There are very few things I've lost patients to over the years, and mold toxicity has been one of those things. And that was, one of the most, I could say, succinct cases that I remember was a gentleman, and we knew he had mold. We measured it in every way you could measure it. We knew the house was contaminated. He refused to remediate it, and he died. It took him about a year, but he got aspergillosis in his lungs, aspergillosis is a type of mold, and it can colonize into the lung fields. And once it hits into the lung, there's about a 65% chance of death once it starts growing into the lung. And so he chose death over remediation. I know that remediation can be daunting and an overwhelming process and task, but death is certainly, in my opinion, not the better of the two choices. So Lisa's asking, we did a mold kit from Lowe's and sent it off to the lab. It came back as mold growth, but no way to remedy it. How do we get rid of it? We taped the sample to our air vent. You got to figure out where it came from. It came from your air, but where? What part? I mean, is the mold growing in your ducts and that's why that colonized, or do you have some other source? I mean, Lisa, the best answer there is to get a good investigator out to do a thorough job, help you find it. So give me a name on that question there. Robbie, she found several species of mold. I don't know how those tests were done, Robbie, first of all, so it's hard for me to give you any kind of feedback there. But if you're taking glutathione injections weekly to try to help detoxify from mold, but you're still in mold, it isn't going to work. You're wasting your money. The number one rule of mold detoxification is get out of the mold. If you're not out of the mold, there's no point in trying to detoxify. You're just throwing your money away. So I don't know where you are with that, but you've got to get the mold under control. You've got to remediate whatever's there, because if you're in a moldy environment, no amount of detoxification is going to do the trick. Let's see. How long do you think it will be to detox mold? It varies for different people, but the biggest variable in my experience is the time they were in the mold and the level of illness, that they currently are. So the level of resiliency, if you will, either lack of resiliency, which is illness, or their ability to resiliently recover. Because if you are chronically ill, it can take, I've seen mycotoxins take, a year, in some cases longer, to come out of a person fully through detoxification. So it just depends. And again, a big part of that depends is the environment that you're in. Okay, let's see here. Go down on the right for me. Okay, a lot of comments here. Are there any home tests or body tests that measure other pathogens and biotoxins? There are lots of them. I don't think you want to get wrapped up in that unless you plan on becoming an expert and you're dealing one-on-one directly with people. If you really only need one point, in my opinion, you only need, Elaine, one point of evidence to know that you have a mold problem, and that's measuring mycotoxins. If you measure mycotoxins and they're positive, you have a mold problem. Now, is the mold problem in your food, or is the mold problem in your home or your office, that's where the differentiation needs to come. But that's the number one thing that you need to look at and measure. As far as like biofilms or biotoxins, you could rack up a huge lab bill looking at all those other things, but it might not tell you why they're there. It might just tell you that they're there. Whereas at least knowing that if you have mycotoxins, now you have definitive action steps that you can take to go and now hunt down the source. If you have a mold overgrowth in your body, is eating mushrooms out of the question? No, but certain mushrooms, because certain mushrooms are actually they help your immune system, like lion's mane would be an example of an immune supporting mushroom. There are a number of species of healthy mushrooms that you can eat, but as a general rule of thumb, my advice would be, if you're in mold and you have mold toxicity issue, you should be working with somebody. This is mold is not a DIY project. It's just not. If you try to do it on your own, look, I've just seen people spend. I had a woman not too long ago. It was what was it, $50,000 on just because she didn't have guidance, right? And not that. So like a perfect example would be you hire a mold inspector, and depending on which state that you live in, like in some states, it's legal for the mold inspector to also be a mold remediator. So you get the same person that's saying you have mold is the same person who's going to clean your mold. That's a conflict of interest. You don't want that conflict of interest in somebody doing that level of work for you at that level of cost without any oversight, because who's going to check their work? And that's just one example of 1,000 examples I could give you on a huge mistake that can be made that can keep you sick and keep you from getting well, but also keep you broke, because again, it can get expensive. Does mold toxicity cause or affect exercise resistance? Mold toxicity oftentimes leads to the inability to tolerate exercise. So what ends up happening is people are so inflamed they don't do well with exercise. Exercise is like the tipping point for their health, and so then they lose their ability to be physical in the world, and that deteriorates their muscle mass, and then that weakens their immune system further, and then the mold just slowly eats away. How does one find if they have a water leak upstairs? Lots of ways. You can do infrared. Infrared temperature variances in the wall sometimes will show you where there's a potential for a water leak. You can do fiber optic cameras. You can do mold moisture meters, in the sheetrock and around the wall basins to see. Lots of different ways. Yeah, I hate to hear that, Rose. Rose says we gutted the house. It cost $1 million. We had sewage in the ducts, mold and dead animals. Yeah, that sounds like a major problem. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I know it's a rough deal. Let's see here. So I have a question. This is from Ocean Healer. I had a question. Some dry clean only clothes were stored in suitcases in the garage for 2 years. Can we steam them at home? They smell musty, and I had a mold condition. No, those clothes are toast. Get rid of them. They're not worth the risk. I hate to say that because I know clothes can be expensive, but your health not doing well can be more expensive in more ways than just financially. If you smell must, that's mycotoxin and mold. If you smell it, you don't have to see it. If you smell it, it's there. That was one of the things in my house. We could smell must. We couldn't see it anywhere. And it wasn't until we cracked the wall cavity that it really poured out. And that's, again, but not seeing it, but smelling it was still enough to make us sick. But we left everything behind. When I got out of mold, we left it all behind. It's painful to do that, but you got to weigh your material value in this world with your health. And to me, that's a zero competition game. Your health is the most important thing you have. Your health is your wealth. And so you've got to preserve that first and foremost. Does iodine kill mold in your sinus? There is no mold in my house. Iodine is an antifungal and antibacterial naturally. The question isn't does it kill it? The question is will it kill it in your case, right? And this is where probably by itself, no. I would be suspect that would be an effective way. One of the things that you should probably do is have a culture of your sinuses done. And then if you find, if you culture the mold, then you can have your doctor subject that culture to different agents to see what will best kill the mold that's growing in you. That's probably the best way to go about it. Yeah, Joanne's asking, what kind of doctor should I find? A functional one. The problem in conventional is you're going to find a bunch of people that call you crazy. The same thing with conventional mold inspectors. You're going to find mold inspectors that think you're being an alarmist. Mold is no joke. You got to find somebody who knows what the heck they're doing, who can help you, who's got good experience, who's not going to minimize the potential possibility that mold can make you very sick. Let's see. Keep going down. Do I have a duct cleaning company that I recommend? No, I don't. If the ducts are that bad that you suspect there's mold in them, then to replace the ducts. I know that can be expensive too, but if what happens a lot of times is when you have debris, stored up in your ducts, and there's mold in that, and you get somebody to scour that ductwork, what you're really doing is stirring all that stuff up, and you're blowing it right back into your air. Cleaning air ducts, if they're bad and they really need a scouring, you should look at the cost of replacement versus the cost of cleaning. And no amount of in my experience anyway, no amount of fumigating the ducts is going to be successful. The most successful thing I've seen is fumigating ductwork with essential oil. I have seen be successful, but a lot of these mold killers, not so much. At least these like heavy industrial mold agents that are commonly used. Okay, I think I got to go home. It's 7:30. We took this a little bit longer than usual. So, look, I hope you walk away at least with something beneficial tonight. And if you suspect mold, again, number one walkaway is work with somebody who's an expert who understands, who really understands mold and mold poisoning and mold toxicity. Otherwise, you're going to have your illness normalized. You're going to be the one that's called crazy for all intents and purposes, and it's just a rough road, and it's a hell of a struggle. And I don't want to see that for any of you going through that. So work with somebody who's an expert. It's you can do diet. Sometimes you can get away with a do-it-yourself project with diet. And find a pathway forward. But when you're talking about mold, you definitely don't want to go it without guidance. All right, folks. I hope you have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Monday for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Hey, if you're not subscribed to my newsletter and you don't want to get censored, or you don't want my information to be censored from getting into your inbox, come over to glutenfreesociety.org and make sure you sign up. It's free. We'll send you a ton of free information. We'll get you access to all of our past shows and everything else. Just make sure you're on our newsletter, on our email list. It's the only way that we can really guarantee the lack of censorship. As you know, we've had our fair share of it over the past 2 years. So have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Monday for another episode. Take care. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.